This is the global temperature data from 1840 to 2020 that is on the woodfortrees.org site. And what I'm going to do today is try running a few hypothetical trend lines through this data and see exactly where they might go. The first thing you'll notice that is if you're going to run a single trend line in this data, you're going to be into some big trouble. Linear trend lines just don't seem to cut it. If I were to use the entire data set and run a trend line, I would get something like this. I don't know, I could put it any number of places here. This line understates a lot of the observations and overstates others. And you'll notice that there's entire sections of this trend line where great chunks of observations are not normally distributed around it. This is not a good situation at all. So let's back off of that one and go with another possibility. Possibility number 2, and let me change the color of the line here. Possibility number 2 is that we started running a trend line through the data up until about 1950 here, which looks fine. I'm running basically between 1900 and 1950 at this point, and that looks fine, except to say that if I were to do projections or forecasts beyond about 1950 using this trend line, I would seriously overstate the global temperature rise occurring as a consequence. I would end up with out-of-sample forecasts that way overshoot what actually happened between the period of time from 1950 on. And this is a terrible kind of thing to have happen, particularly if you're trying to make out-of-sample forecasts. Let me take another possibility here using a blue line. And that basically says, okay, let's start with roughly 1950 and go up until the current. That would get us a line like this. No good either, because basically what's happening is that I am overshooting in this area right here, roughly since the year 2000. So let's back off of that and basically say we need to run a line starting around 2000 through this data, and let me use an orange line to indicate that, and that line would end up being horizontal if not have a slight decreasing slope. Well, a production economist would look at data like this and say, I need to run a curvilinear curve through this data, not a linear curve. And maybe we should try something like that and see exactly where we end up here. Let me try a curvilinear curve through this data that would look something like this. Now, notice that this curve is going to keep coming down as I get into these more recent observations. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to try to maintain at least a degree of normalcy for these observations as I get up into these recent observations. But take note here that if I'm going to try to do a projection off of this into the current out of sample, and let's make that green here, I would end up with a projection that would end up being quite flat, if not a possible another downward curve. Let's look at this one. Since we're out of sample, who knows what's going to happen? And also notice that you are going to be at a huge distance away from what the projection would be have we just simply ran with the linear trend line, which would have come out something like this, meaning that the projection out of sample is much more different, just simply depending on which functional form we choose for the in-sample data. And matters get worse and worse. With that, I'm going to end this video for the time and take a look and see how it turned out.